Is there within the Star Wars canon, pun intended, a sound you only ever used once?
I'm sure there must be. Oh yeah, there is a sound. What is it? It's a scene in Jedi where Chewie bumps his head on a pipe.
Yeah.
And we went around making pipe hits, and there was a really funny musical one that kind of cartoony, boo like that. And we used it. It's a scene where I can't remember where he hits his head, but he bumps his head on a pipe, and it's in the library called Chewie Hits Head. And it's probably been cut into other movies, though.
But it's never not in another one of yours.
No, I don't think I've ever used it again. You know, it was an accident somewhere where we were banging on things and ended up with a pipe. Yeah, there's Chewie hits head, hits pipe. That's an important sound effect. This is the way to the theater, the main theater that we've seen.
Birthplace
of THX. That stood for Tom Homan Crossover.
Oh, really?
Okay, some people think it's THX because of George's movie,
right?
Which, and I think in part it is. The origin of this is a little fuzzy.
Like a natural confluence.
Yeah,
of
there's
things.
no actual thing, but Tom Homan developed a crossover. It's an engineering term for speakers in a theater have tweeters that are high frequencies, and there's mid-range speakers and low frequency, and the crossover is how you divide up the frequencies among these speakers that are devoted to different bands of the spectrum.
If you drew a Venn diagram, they're not perfectly separated. It's the degree to which they overlap. Is that the crossover?
Yeah, it is. It has to do with, I mean, I'm not an acoustic engineer, I should be. It has a lot to do with how sound is distributed evenly throughout the theater. So one objective of THX was that people in different listening positions would have something that was consistent. Right. Whereas maybe the speakers that were in existence prior to that were very directional. So someone in different corners would get a different sensation of the movie, and maybe not, it wasn't as clear, that sort of thing.
But this is the main entrance to the theater. We came in through the downstairs, but this is where the actual lobby.
You know, listen to this. It has sounded like this for, what, 35, 40 years?
A creaky door.
I'm going to record that today before I go. It's the same sound. Come in this way to the Mix A. Up to this point, we were just using makeshift spots that were, in offices or basements and things. So finally, we had a large theater under our own control, and we could not only run movies just to enjoy them, we could mix them from here.
This is George's seat. This is where he would sit and watch his movies, which is totally appropriate. I love that. I mean, just imagine, like, George sitting here, right? He's making movies, he's concentrating on movies, but he's also, like, he's responsible for a few thousand people. And he's sitting here and he's trying to filter out all of that responsibility. Just take in what's happening there. That's pretty lovely.
You know, my room's referred to as Ben's cave.
Is it really?
Is it? Yes.
No way.
Yeah, because the original script for Star Wars, Obi-Wan Kenobi's desert hut, was called Ben's Cave.
Oh, of course.
If you read it in the script, it says Ben's Cave.
Interior Ben's Cave.
Yeah, and so even though it was never a cave, it was like an igloo or something.
So tell me what we're looking at here.
This is one of the rare photographs taken in Mix A, where we're sitting, of mixing on Return of the Jedi. And it shows the back of my head, a young version of myself. And Howie Hammerman, who was not a mixer, but he was our most inventive engineer. He was, when sound department at Lucasfilm started, and I moved up here on the first Star Wars film, the entire department was just me and Howie.
Oh,
and I would wreck things and burn them out, and Howie would fix them. That was our relationship. He was always complaining that I, overloaded something or broke something, used it improperly. And so for a number of years, that was the entire sound department, really, the two of us, working in the basement of George Lucas's house in San Anselmo. That's where we started. And that was our first mix room. We had a small ability to mix there, but of course it was not high quality, or it was in a proper room. We didn't have a big mix console.
How did you come to work on the first Star Wars? How did that happen?
I got started on the first Star Wars. I was just finishing my master's degree at USC Cinema. I had been in physics at Allegheny College. I came to USC. I got a partial scholarship based on a film I made, a World War I aircraft combat movie.
Yeah, we were talking about this off camera. I think you're going to need to explain this World War I combat.
Yeah, I started it in high school. I made a film called Yankee Squadron. And it was more or less wings or dawn patrol. It was a squadron of American planes fighting the Germans and with the Red Baron kind of activity.
That is a highly ambitious project for a high school student.
It was very ambitious, and it was challenging because we didn't, of course, know what we would do initially about how to do the airplanes in the film. We went to an airfield called Cole Palin's Airdrome in Poughkeepsie, New York. It's still there today. He was a collector and flyer and restorer of original World War I aircraft. Dude. But at that time, he would fly them every Sunday for an air show. And so he had a grass strip with hangars and people in uniform, and it was he probably had a dozen planes.
Did he have German and English? Did
he had both types. He had
Fokkers.
He had a Fokker triplane.
Yeah.
He had a Sopwith pup. He had several. He had a flying Newport 28, which was an original. Been used in the movies or in Hollywood, and eventually it found his way to his collection. We went to see him. We were teenagers. We said, Cole, we went to your show. Could we use some of your planes so we could climb in and out of them and pretend to fly?
Right.
He said, sure, just go ahead. So he's very accommodating. So we came back with our uniforms and some of our props, and we filmed the airdrome sequences at his place. So we had real planes that we could get in and out of. And we had a few fist fights and bumping against the planes. We treated them like movie props, and that sort of thing. But how did we do the flying? I did go up in the air with Cole, and I did some air-to-air, just shots of the ground. So I had some cutaways. But I came up with an idea that we would do all the flying underwater. Okay, and here's the idea came because when I was a kid, snorkeling, and you'd go underwater and you'd make explosions in the sand and the mud. Did you ever do that?
Yeah, totally.
Because you could go down. Wow, looks like an explosion.
Yeah, totally.
And in talking about doing our film Yankee Squadron, I thought, well, we could do the explosions that way. So we got a big aquarium. We got a very large aquarium, built an apparatus in the front yard. Shielded off from the sun, and we used 1/72nd scale model planes that we painted to match Cole's planes. And so with weights in them, you could drop them through the tank and the planes would chase each other and fly. But because they were in water, they would be slowed down and they would be actually aerodynamic, right?
Oh my God.
And so you had some planes that would go to the right and some planes would go to the left. You could put a few drops of India ink in one of the planes, drop it in, and it would go down with this big black smoke trail.
Oh my goodness.
Of course, then you'd have to empty the tank and clean it all up. So we labored for 2 summers with these special effects shots that way. We built a cockpit section that we had in the front yard. And once again, thinking about how can I get the clouds so when he's flying, we took this huge mirror off the bathroom wall, took it outside, put it behind the cockpit replica, angled it such that it reflected the sky and the clouds above. And it was on a desk chair that had a swivel, and you could move the mirror. And so you could have someone flying in side view, and the clouds would be scrolling behind them, and it was done all in camera. So we used a lot of different methods like that, and it was sort of an idea of physics. How we knew the planes wouldn't work on wires; they would be too light, and so it worked out well enough that we made this movie, Yankee Squadron, and it won a National Student Award festival in Kentucky. And I got invited to New York by Pauline Kael. Of all crazy, she was a judge at the contest.
That's crazy.
Yeah, I get a letter, and it was Richard Schickel was the other judge. They said, "Oh, come to New York anytime and see us," or something. And so I was just finishing up college, and so I thought, well, I'll go see them, and see what they say. And I saw Pauline Kael, went to her apartment, and I didn't know as much about her as I do now.
Yeah,
you know,
I mean, that's probably good.
Yeah, her significance in history.
Yeah.
And she just encouraged me to, she said, don't go to film school. You're ready, just go out and make movies. Something like that, you know. But I didn't take her advice. I did go to film school because I didn't really have any camera training or editorial training other than what I was able to figure out at home with, you know, amateur equipment.
So I'm not hearing in this education between physics and film anything about sound yet.
Well, another hobby that I had growing up was recording. Most of this came from my father. He's the one that showed me how to use our movie camera, our 8mm camera. And then one time when I was quite sick when I was 6 years old, and I was in the hospital for a while. When I came home, I couldn't go back to school right away. And so my father brought home a tape recorder from Syracuse University where he was a professor. It was a big, heavy thing. You could hardly lift it. At that time, that was high tech. That's like bringing you know, a Cray computer home for a kid or something later. And he showed me how to use it, and I began recording my voice and playing back and having the fun of running it slow or backwards, whatever I could do. And I had a real interest in recording, just as a hobby at that point. And I used to just point the mic at the television, and I started recording my favorite television shows and movies. And I stockpiled all these tapes. And that was a way I put on headphones and lay back at night and listen to movies. Wow. And that was just
what a formative education.
Yeah, it was just a way of enjoying them over again. Later, you know, kids would have DVD, and you could study something. So I became very familiar. I wasn't aware at the time with how movie soundtracks are put together because I love the music. Yeah. I love the sound effects. I had favorite sounds in movies that I would love hear over and over again.
And you'd spend like hundreds of hours just listening.
Just listening instead of listening to, you know, maybe, I mean, I loved music and I was a drummer in a band and things, but so I just had a familiarity with the intricacies of movie sound. How, you know, when you listen to just the soundtrack, the movie comes back to life. Yeah. The sound stimulates the imagery. And so you get, it was a way of recalling a movie that I liked. And later, when I got more interested, even more dedicated, I would take my tape recorder to the theater. Take my gym bag, you know, little reel
like
to reel.
Like Jewel in Diva, you're actually recording.
Yeah, I remember recording Goldfinger, you know, getting it, but when I got home, it was mostly me breathing, you know.
Well, when you uncouple the sound from the visuals, you must be able to hear some stark differences in the quality of a sound mix.
Well, you do, you know, you study it. I never considered movie making or sound as a profession. I had hobbies just like my father, my grandfather, photography, sound, you know, shortwave radio, whatever it might have been. Yeah. Sports, I did a lot of sports. And so I with the encouragement of my parents, they just let me explore these things.
They fomented your hobbies.
Yeah, my sister has said later, she said to me, I mean recently, my older sister, you know, Benny, that was how I was referred to. She said, I just couldn't understand. You're listening to all those cartoons and Errol Flynn movies as a kid. I just think that was a waste of time. But now I realize it brought something special, foundation to your career. You know.
It's that in Steve Martin's autobiography, someone at the early part of his career says, you will eventually use everything you've ever learned.
That is so true. Even in school, because I went to this nice liberal arts college, I've used a bit of every class I went to, whether it was art history or English, philosophy. Movies encompass all the arts. They really do.
So you show up for the first Star Wars movie. Yeah. And are you hired as part of half of the sound department?
Gary Kurtz, the producer of Star Wars, who had also been a USC grad, and George they had done American Graffiti and had their success. He called USC, Ken Mura, the sound professor there, and said, we're looking for someone to collect sounds for our new movie, The Star Wars, it was called then.
The Star Wars.
Yeah, Adventures of Luke Starkiller. And do you have another Walter Murch? That's kind of what they said, because
That's a big pair of shoes to fill.
They still are bigger than mine. He had been George's sound, and editorial cohort for a number of years, and but he was busy with Francis Coppola doing The Conversation and other projects, and so Ken Mura, the professor there, I happened to have been his teaching assistant. I had a job in the sound department, mixing other students' films and helping out recording, restoring an old library which came from RKO that the college inherited, that had King Kong's original nitrate tracks in it. But anyways, I was recommended for this job, and I went to the studio, met Gary Kurtz, eventually George Lucas, and they showed me Ralph McQuarrie's paintings on the wall, and told me they wanted to, they needed sounds for the Wookiee, because this is before filming was going to take place. Right. So they wanted some kind of pattern, some kind of model for the sound of the Wookiee, so they would know how on the set they would direct, Peter Mayhew in the costume. And I don't think they knew at that point what the limitations or how flexible the mask was, so on. So we went right to work on the Wookiee. They gave me a script, and I read the script, and I said, this is the film I've always wanted to make. I had made similar things as a kid, with spaceships and ray guns and things.
I mean, you had made a dogfight film in high school, and there's so much dogfight footage that made it into Star Wars. It must have felt like a one-to-one.
I've done so many dogfights, because later when I was editing the prequels, I was just the dogfight specialist. I've cut so many dogfights. I think more than anyone else in the world, but anyways, that's a little bit of a brag. But so, but I was asked to do sound, to collect sound, and George, we had ideas. He had ideas of, he wanted to use animals, make it out of animal speech, by using recordings of some animals.
Right. Like Tarzan's yell was always famously assembled out of.
It was assembled out of some pieces, which later I figured out what it was.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but it was not a person to do the voice of Chewbacca. He wanted the naturalness of a real sound.
Right.
And that's the direction he put me off.
He wanted to not hear a human voice at the back of that.
Yeah, we're all experts at analyzing human voices in our daily life, and it's very hard to disguise a human voice. We can detect it, and he wanted his aliens to be undetectable as humans. Right. And so the task always was to come up with a way of doing that. And so the idea of taking bits of animal sounds, and he'd suggested bears or dogs or some other mammals. And so I just set out trying to record material like that. Go to zoos or...
That's got to be, that's actually, I'm sure that's quite difficult, because animals don't necessarily vocalize on your calendar.
Animals do not take direction. You can wait for hours, and all you have is a snoring animal at the zoo with, sitting there with flies, buzzing around it. It ultimately, for Chewbacca, the solution was to find a trained animal under the hands of a trainer, which we found a fellow named Monty Cox who had a ranch in Tehachapi, and he had animals that were rented out for movies. Right. He had bears, lions, and many things. And he had a young bear that was controllable and friendly, and he knew the personality of the bear. And so we went there and spent an afternoon recording by teasing the bear with food that the bear liked, taking it away before, that sort of thing. And the bear would cry, that's, and recording from two microphones. And out of that session, you got lots of little bits of animal sound, grunts, some angry sounds, some cries. And you can use those as building blocks. Go back in the studio and cut each sound into us, isolate it, and
you're physically cutting, because
physically
you don't have digital editing.
You transfer it to either magnetic tape or magnetic film, and then you splice and cut with a razor blade or a splicer. And you can isolate each little sound. You can copy them and slow them down. You can run them backwards.
And you can mix these down, but you don't have many tracks.
No, initially I was only able to combine 2 tracks to do things. Then eventually it got a little better. I had 3. Okay, and so the limitations are good sometimes because it makes you decide ahead of time. Well, what's important? So Chewie was slowly evolved over that time period to the point where they felt, yeah, this is going to work, and then they went off to England to make the movie, and they're gone for months. I stayed here, and in fact, my base of operations was at ILM in Van Nuys. So that was
before it moved up north.
Yeah, that was the offices of Lucasfilm then, while they were off shooting, and so I was thrown in with the whole ILM crew. As they were building for the first time a model shop, and
a studio, motion control
optical
equipment,
printers, and everything. And so I was witnessing and all that development. It was very exciting. They were building the Death Star trench, the full size, well, the large room-size miniatures. And I actually got involved in some of it, very minor things. Dennis Mirren and I, because they needed help, were shooting plates. That is backgrounds for the Death Star surface that you see out the windshields as they go by.
Oh, right. The side projection.
Points of view of the horizon of the Death Star, which was assembled out of. I took pictures looking down on top of the miniature Death Star set. Yeah. And they printed hundreds of those pictures, cut them out, and then made a mosaic on a big table, curved sort of table. And then you could fly over that and with the camera and make it, drift one way or the other. So I had a little bit of exposure to, seeing some of the, participating in the special effects.
Years ago, a technology company told me that they tried to hire mushroom-shaped people, which is people with a strong foundation in their main skill, but a wide amount of interest in other things at the high level. And I bought a Nagra 4S earlier this year, and I did some coverage on Tested about it, and then you reached out to me and said, this is the model that I used, and you sent me a picture of you on a runway in the 70s recording sounds for Lucasfilm. But the thing that I really took away from that is you're wearing custom coveralls and this really custom rig. Can you describe this rig to me?
Well, we had a lot of pride in ourselves then, and we said we're this hotshot sound recording crew going out.
It's just 2 of you.
It was 2. There were 3 of us,
3
and sometimes 4.
Okay.
But essentially there was 2 of us on most missions, and we considered them missions, And it was either Howie and me, or Gary Summers and me, or Randy Tom eventually and me. And we took pride in what we were doing. And we were going to a lot of air shows, recording racing planes at Reno and
to use for sounds of spaceships.
Yeah, and so we saw sort of the bravado of the pilots, the sort of Top Gun, macho kind of, the way they were dressed with coveralls and hats with their logos. We said, we've got to do that, We're Top Guns, So we dressed up. We made jumpsuits that had patches that said Star Wars and anything. We tried to collect patches for missions that we went on. And at that time, the recording equipment was bulky with batteries and Dolby units and things. And it was probably 30-some pounds of equipment to carry all day and run around. And so we had them on pack frames, the equipment. And we had hats that said sound designer and so on. Yeah, so we would show up sometimes, not every mission, but we would wear those out of pride and fun.
Yeah.
And then we back at the studio.
That seems like a really important part of the culture. It's not just sitting there and just doing a job and buttoning down a list. You're like, you're arriving, showing something. I mean,
well, we were a little embarrassed when we went to the Naval Air Station, San Diego, to record jets, because there were the real guys,
wearing real coveralls.
And we're recording, F-14s and things, and they're all in the, mirror sunglasses and we're in our little uniforms. I think they thought we were nuts.
I didn't realize that your very first task was assembling sounds for Chewie. Yeah. But one of the things, I've spent a lot of time building my own R2-D2 and spending a lot of time with your sound library for R2-D2. And I'd really like to talk a little bit about the development of those voices, right? There's one is assembling the sounds that make up Chewie's voice, but then there's finding the character in those sounds. Yeah. Can you talk about that process of working with George for that?
Well, I didn't realize it since we were at first, the philosophy that was going to bring success. We were blundering and experimenting. Ultimately, I found, and especially over the years, that human performances, whether you're working with a prop to make a sound, or you find a squeaky door somewhere and you use it as an instrument, really, to get just the right creak, or in the case of alien or robot voices, injecting yourself somehow into it, so you give it a performance that there's a human thinking behind it. You're disguised somehow, but your performance is in there. And so it seems evident now that why didn't we do that at first? But like most bits of research, you just don't know until you have many failures, until you finally arrive at a process. The robots, R2, eventually ended up, of course, being a process. And simply stated, it involved what we called the organic part of the voice, which was in me, human input performing.
There's a lot of you. It's you screaming when R2 is being shot through the air,
some
right?
of it's just straightforward, me sped up like Chip and Dale, that kind of thing, and being and the same with Wally. A lot of it is just you hide under. I used to have to hide under the table where I worked in George's basement because there's people in the kitchen making noise upstairs. And the only quiet place I could go to do R2 was in this, I'd crawl under the desk where, put some cases around it, laying down, and I had a microphone. So
you're telling me that original R2 sounds were made with you lying under a table in George's basement while people were chatting in the kitchen?
Yes, exactly. That's where the scream came from. It definitely was done at that moment, yeah. So I found a way to several different pathways to have my voice trigger or envelope other sounds, other electronic sounds, and it was the combination of the organic part of it, which was me, which is, and then I would call it the electronic or mechanical part, which was synthetic, which was beeps and buzzes and things you could create electronically on a synthesizer.
But you ended up, I remember watching
There's more to it than that a little bit. But
of course, but I remember watching the sequels with BB-8, and I was thinking, I actually thought into your experience of like someone comes to you and goes, Ben, we're going to make the sequels and we've got this brand new robot and we want you to make a brand new voice that is just as awesome as R2-D2, go. And I think that sounds like a terrifying monolith of a task to attempt to take on.
Well, you're absolutely right. One problem that I've faced is because Star Wars is far in the past, and the sounds have become folklore, and everyone knows them. And
I literally had a friend in high school when we were in a crowd and we couldn't find each other. He would go, and I would go.
Yeah, you knew what it meant because it had meaning to you. And so when one gets hired later, after all these years have gone by, and they say, just as you said, I'm going to robot voice, go. and they don't realize it takes a long time to develop something, develop a character. You can't just go usually and hit it right off the bat. And doing new robots, I found not as much success because people they would always come to me with the same line. We have a robot, new robot, it's going to be in electronic language, and it's got to be just like R2-D2, but not sound anything like R2-D2. that actually it can't be R2, but it's got to work just as well. And the curse on it for me, creatively, was that R2 was so difficult to do and to get a range of emotions that I kind of used every possible, I would say, basic human non-word sound. And if something's sad, it goes, ooh,
Well, can I give an example that I loved, which is I was looking at your sound library and there was a file called I Don't Know. And I clicked on it and it was R2 going, woo, woo, woo. And I was like, that's literally one-to-one. That's amazing.
Well, some of them, when I first started doing it, I wrote out the lines as if R2 was speaking English.
Right.
The script didn't have any lines. The script might say R2 reacts or R2 buzzes or something. Yeah. There wasn't anything more specific. And so since I needed some kind of guide, I would make up a line in English, like I don't know, or don't bother me, 3PO, or something like that. And I would then mimic the intonation of a line like that.
Yeah.
And that gave me some confidence, at least something to work toward. And so the earliest lines that made, the earliest library, had many things that were mimicking what you might have said in English, but using sound effects to do it. And later, when I got more confident, I didn't have to have that guide of it being in English. There was great worries along the way on the first Star Wars film that this was not going to work.
Right. Right. You didn't have any. There were no guidelines.
There were no
guardrails.
precedent for it, and so you had
for taking these things highly seriously.
Yeah, exactly. You had an opening battle, 2 robots, one with no mouth talking in a British accent, the other whistling and beeping in a battle. Okay, and no synchronized. Previous robots had a blinking light or they had a mouth that worked.
Oh, right, BB-8.
Would people understand and get it? Because it's a lot to sort of conceptually to figure out. So fortunately it did work, but it was the last thing really, the longest thing worked on was R2 on the first film, because it was just a very difficult problem.
I realized that we're also here to talk a little bit about this room.
Yeah, right.
When I worked here from '98 to '03, this was where we came and screened monthlies or weeklies, right? All the completed shots that week, and then occasionally we'd come and watch movies after hours. It's an amazing theater, but you've been working in this building, in this room, for decades.
Yes, this room, which we called Mix A, was the very first Lucasfilm mix theater. Prior to this point, we had to go to Los Angeles, where there was an official mixing theater at a studio to complete the movies.
So you did all your pre-production under George's table in his basement, and then you went to
We
LA.
would go from the basement and carrying all of our tapes and stuff, and we would go to a high-tech facility at Goldwyn Studios or Warner Brothers, and they'd be hired to mix our movie, and we would stand by to supervise it. We always wanted to have our own facility. So after the success of the first 2 Star Wars films, or even after the first one, George, of course, his dream was to have his own studio here in Northern California with its own sound department and a mixed room like this. This beautiful room. And so a lot of effort was put into making this the best mixing theater, sounding mixing room on Earth, and also be innovative. Motion picture sound at that point was technically complacent. It had been basically using the same specs of the quality of sound, the range of highs and low frequencies, and so on, the amount of noise and distortion, engineering terms. It had been in that form for decades and hadn't really changed, because the worldwide release of films was an optical process. It had a little squiggly line along the edge of the film.
Right, yeah, I was a projectionist, I remember.
And it had great limitations, whereas the music industry and broadcast industry was moving into multi-track tape recorders and Dolby, and there were better speakers and reproduction systems, and the goal was by George Lucas was, how can we take those innovations and bring them into the film industry with our films.
So he saw money on the table. Like we can do more than has been done.
We can have better quality. One problem was that you could do a film mix at a studio. It would sound very good, high quality, but once it got to the theaters, anything goes.
Yeah.
It could be played with a speaker out. Right. It could be played really low level and muffled. It could
be whole channel missing.
Yeah, if you really went out into the world, you found that it was very disappointing. We would go, especially after the first Star Wars, oh, that's what it sounds like. That's what people are getting.
Right. You're going out into the world and seeing
it's crushing.
The substandard.
Right, and so there was a big goal on the part of Lucasfilm to take an initiative to upgrade the movie industry sound process, and they brought on Tom Holman, who was really a top thinker, scientist in acoustics and reproduction, and a whole other team, and they designed and built this room, Mix
And this
A.
is a room in a room. It's a fully isolated
It's isolated
box.
from everywhere else, so the room is very quiet, first of all. which is good for listening purposes. It had eventually specs, that is what you hear in here, the THX standards they call it. And the idea was that what you mixed in this room was high quality, as high as it could be. And then if we can just make theaters behave the same way,
right,
then you have that confidence that your product and the work you put into it can be multi-channel, it can have subwoofers, it can be retain its quality as you go along. So this theater was really the benchmark.
This is the original THX.
This is the original THX theater. And the first film mixed in here was Return of the Jedi. The theater was just ready in time. And
so even though the Star Wars is a huge success and he came up here to make Empire, it took that long to build this space out.
Yeah, it took a few years to build this building. And there's more here. There's another mix room downstairs in the building, which was a smaller version of this room, which is where I would do my sound design work on pre-mix and develop things. So in this room was Jedi, Temple of Doom, Willow, all those films in the 80s, parts of E.T., just and other films that weren't Lucas films were being mixed here. They could be contracted here in Northern California. I will say that what was different here than, say, Hollywood was that not only did we have a nice studio and a mix room, but there was also research and development. And money was put into it, and new ideas were being gathered and employed under this roof.
A company that is totally willing to let its employees put on coveralls and have special rigs for going out has its eyes on the right kind of prize.
Well, I was spoiled actually because sound traditionally is pretty low on the totem pole in terms of where they spend money and time.
Which is, by the way, a crime, because I will watch a film with bad visuals and great sound long before I'll watch a film with great visuals and terrible sound.
Well, the sound completes the illusion. We talk about the magic that ILM, of course, would generate, but nonetheless, it wasn't complete until the audio is added to the visuals. That was the final part of the illusion. Hollywood did recognize that. Initially, when they gave out the first Special Effects Award in 1938 to the Academy, it included the sound person as well. It was the special effects was divided into two categories: visual effects and audible effects.
Oh, wow.
So if you got an award, let's see, the first film that got an award was The Rains Came, which had a big earthquake and storm sequence in it, that the Oscar plaque went to members of the visual effects team and whoever was supervising the audio, the sound effects.
Phenomenal.
And so, because they recognized, at that time anyways, that the special effects needed this synergy connection. They eventually dropped that dual awarding 20 years later or so, but everybody recognized that the sound was important. But the sound was not, sound came in the process almost last. Last was the lab generating the prints to go to the theater.
But sound was just one.
Sound was one step before that, and so money is spent. People are frustrated. They're tired. They're stressed, and then you get to the sound people. So you inherit directors and producers who are under stress and they have no patience, maybe, and it's a tough job in that regard. And so sound was never elevated, to much beyond that. And it still stays kind of a little bit in that position.
But it does sound like this room was part of sound, of a shift in sound in 20th century film almost. Well, as a pivot point.
It was a pivot point because not only the quality, but we were generating the first 5-channel, 6-channel mixes. By the time we got to Willow, we were doing what is common today in the way films are released. We could play films here in a much greater stereo range, with more speakers if we wanted to, even though we couldn't release the film that way.
Now, when you're mixing in here, what is the layout? Is your mixing board up on the
mixing board was 2/3 the way up. There's a little desk there now, which is used to control the projector, but there was a mixing console sitting there. This was one of the first, if not the first, stadium-style theaters. Well, it's steep, and placing the mixing console where it is there in the middle, you're looking straight across at the screen. So it's actually more comfortable than, say, up, you know, you're all day if you're mixing, because
It's just right across.
you have to remember that mixing at this time is not there's no automation.
Right. Right.
Whatever you do as a group of mixers, 2 or 3 of you together, someone with music, someone with dialogue, someone with sound effects, it's a performance, like a small band. You have to go through a reel, say 10 minutes of the movie, rehearse it. The music's going to come up here. The mine cars go by here. The explosion is on this track over here.
You're like musicians.
Yeah, and you practice that. You practice it. You make notes. You make the little scratch marks on the console or tape marks.
Wow.
And then when it's time to do a take, you close the doors. You don't let anybody in. And 1, 2, 3, go. And you do your best to perform the mix. And if you blow it, then you can back up and then punch in and go further. Yeah. But it was unlike today, where you can surgically stop and examine.
This is all motors and things moving through motors.
Here, it's all being played back on machines. They're turning with film.
Now, is George sitting dead center third row?
I would usually think he's about 3 rows down from us. I can kind of see him standing up to make a comment, hands in pockets, pacing back and forth or whatever.
Lots of pacing?
Yeah, there's a lot of pacing in here by all producers. I won't mention it. It was not George. We did have a producer battle in here once, where one's down front and one's up there, and he's in the projector beam, so his shadow's giant down here, and the other person arguing is this way. It was a Citizen Kane visual. But it's a process where what happens in the theater here is you're reproducing what hopefully will be the experience in the theater.
Right.
You're making the final track, which will go to theaters. And so you're evaluating it as an audience might do it. And who's ever supervising it creatively, let's say George Lucas, they would listen to what we're doing. And if they didn't like something or they had a comment, they'd stand up and say, stop. And we would discuss what to do. They might say, well, the music's too loud. Or the first scene we ever mixed in here was in the middle of Return of the Jedi, where the Emperor arrives and comes down a ramp from his shuttlecraft, and there's a big John Williams gigantic cue. And we were very nervous about that. We hadn't mixed in this room. We were all new mixers. We weren't had the years of experience. You divided up the work. We got Gary, you want to do dialogue? Yeah, okay. Randy, I'll do music. Roger, you music? Okay. I'll do sound effects. Okay, right. And we started with that big fanfare and the ship landing, and the Emperor coming down the ramp, and it was so loud because we were afraid that we wouldn't have the right impression. Yeah. And then I think George said, can it be louder? Like that. Everybody was just, I think, nervous. Yeah. And we made this enormously loud scene. Later, when we had done the whole film, we had to go back and adjust things. But that we were really kind of went down the wrong road on that first couple of days of mixing. But it took a while you had to be practical about it too,
It's totally amazing when you talk about films up until Star Wars being all sort of accreting to a certain sound envelope, and that this room was really built as an avatar for the audience that would watch the film.
That's right, yeah.
That it is literally, I had not thought about the advent of the summer blockbuster that Lucas and Spielberg really sort of generated, being connected deeply with an appreciation for the audience's experience. But now, from what you're saying, I can understand they're inextricably linked.
Yeah, this is you're simulating the audience experience. And being the last step in the process, you're usually near release of the film, and so that's around the corner. You may be testing the film out in the field somewhere and take it to a theater. We always would. We would go to a theater in San Francisco, the North Point, or the cinema when they existed, and you would play the movie for an audience just to see problems, if there's something really wrong, something they didn't understand, and that sort of thing. It is sort of the last chance to solve every problem, and so quite often the challenges in mixing are that the filmmakers are trying to fix something in the script, or a concept that they never felt they got right.
A special effect they didn't get on the screen.
A special effect or something wrong with the performance of an actor. And we can't We have limits. We try to fix every problem.
An off-screen clank to explain something.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of that. But then also it's exciting. I remember when we were doing Jedi, the last part where the Emperor's firing bolts, and then finally he picks up Vader and throws him into the power trench, and as he raises up Vader, we were working on that scene, and George was here. I don't know why it was. Maybe it's because the projector kept flashing in and out as we were going back and forth. I said, George, wouldn't it be great if you saw like a skull or something reflected on, on the front of Vader's mask? Because it's skull-like anyways.
Yeah.
But, like a flashing, I was thinking of War of the Worlds, the initial movie.
Right.
The guy gets zapped and you see the skeleton inside him. Somehow that brought it to mind. And he's thinking for a minute and he says, okay. And he goes out the door, over to ILM across the parking lot, and he's gone for 15 minutes or something, and we're working on something else. He comes back and in the door, well, I took care of it. We're going to have a skull. It's not too late to get that in there, animation and stuff. So those moments are fun because then everybody feels like they're participating.
This was a compound, an R&D compound.
And it was having one man making decisions at that point. Of course, it's efficient. And then having ILM just across the parking lot was even, great.
And this wasn't just a mixing stage, am I right? There was also there's Foley work was done.
We wanted to do Foley, which is where you perform sounds while you watch the picture.
Like the walking and the doors opening.
Footsteps, handling props. They're best done to customize them to the actual timing of what's happening on screen.
So rather than recording a sound separately and then mixing it to the track, the film is projected while two people are actually performing actions like walking and opening doors.
Absolutely. And so we didn't have an official room designated for Foley here, but we did we brought on trays. You could bring in a section of metal we had saved, some wood, things where you could do footsteps on a spaceship, dirt, that sort of thing. And Denny Thorpe and some of our first Foley performers would work down here, watching, steeply watching the image. And we were able to not do the entire Foley, but we could certainly do certain things that we thought were particularly important that we wanted to supervise. Still at that point, we were farming the Foley out to teams in LA that had official stages that could be devoted for days.
Right.
Foley takes, might take a few weeks to do the Foley for Jedi. We did do specific things here when we needed it. A lot of Temple of Doom, Indiana Jones Foley was done in this room. We had a big cage so we could lock people in it for the cage that goes down in the fire pit and so on. And
now, each time ILM expanded, it must have shifted the culture of creativity a little bit. First, when the ranch got built, and then second, when the Letterman complex got built, they sort of pulled ILM into multiple directions.
George Lucas's dream was to have ILM at the ranch originally. There was real estate for it. There were difficulties getting clearances from the county.
For the chemicals that might be involved?
Not the chemicals. It had a lot to do with traffic out a long, narrow road. And they had rules for only how many people per acre you could have somewhere. So I don't know at all. It was a disappointment. He did want to build ILM out there in one of the valleys, so we would be close. But it stayed at Kerner Boulevard here for quite a number of years before it went to the Presidio. And yes, it did pull apart a bit, and it was it was nice in the past. I could be doing the mine car chase, and Dennis Muren could walk over and listen to what I was doing, and I could walk over and see what they were doing. Or in the parking lot, there'd be a dump tank doing water through a tunnel. That was movie making, and you felt connected when you had a chance to participate or at least witness.
You had to pause work while they were blowing something up on the slab?
Once in a while, we would pause because we want to see it.
Of course,
they're going to blow something up.
Now, was it the fire in the hole? Was like everyone file out to go watch?
If you could, you'd go outside and see some squibs or something. I mean, what else do we live for?
So you said that George built this room with the goal of making it the best sounding room in the world. I'm curious what your opinion is of how he did.
Well, I think this is the best sounding room in the world. I think that because, of course, our professionalism as mixers was born in this room, me and the team that was here. And it was a big step forward to have control of a space like this. And the films we did here were during a prolific period. And so I just associate all that with success. I think there was a point in analog sound in the mid-1980s with the Dolby processors available and the recording technology, which I really thought we did our best mixes. I think there's a number of reasons for it. Number one, the pacing of the films, the way they're put together editorially.
You mean the production pacing?
The production, the length of shots,
Yeah,
the way you structure an action sequence.
That is changing radically.
It has changed radically. I mean, at that time, you might have had a fight scene in Indiana Jones, and it's kept in a medium shot where things happen all in one shot, where they chase each other around and punch and so on. You're with the shot for a long period of time, whereas fights became eventually a cut on every movement.
Yeah.
Whether it was hand goes back, cut, hand goes forward, another angle, cut, hand hits, cut, you know, and that had become a style. And sound is difficult. You know, sound, it takes a moment for the brain to figure out what you're hearing. And the more rapid shots get, the more difficult it is for the ear to hear something articulate. This is my theory. When you do the pod race in episode 1 of Star Wars, you have this race, and I was cutting the race, not only visually as well as sound, but as time went on over the 2 years we worked, things kept getting shorter and shorter.
Yeah.
Partly because you need the pace needed to pick up, but also partly because the filmmakers come in every day and you see it so many times. Well, let's just make it a little quicker because I'm bored with it this way. But then the sounds, you had to have a distinctive sound for each pod racer, but it had to read within an instant. If you just, you can make a beautiful sound of a spaceship coming and going off in the distance, and that's beautiful. But it's never shown that way in a movie.
No.
You know, it approaches his camera, and before he gets there, it cuts. And so you never hear that nice Doppler shift or something. And so you have to come up with sounds, if you're going to have it articulate, that read very quickly. So the pod race was a real example of that. Each one had to be so different that 21 frames of it playing or a second was enough to say, oh, that's Anakin or that's Sebulba or something like that. And that's the challenge that particularly is faced today in your typical action fantasy movie is getting the sound to be articulated because you're jumping around from perspective so quickly. My sound design process, once samplers and keyboards became so efficient with MIDI and so on, I would do an awful lot of sound design using a keyboard, but it might be, I might put a glass breaking here, fire bursting here.
Oh, so almost like full digital Foley.
Metal twisting here, and I'll see something in the movie, and I'll improvise with it until I like this combination. It's a quick way of improv. An awful lot. I would say 90% of what I design is improvisation. You set up a circumstance, and then you perform within it, and you record everything you do. And then you can pull the things out that worked, or then you can go back and now taking more detail, you say, oh, the metal twisting and the glass breaking, this particular files, they work well together.
Right.
And so now I'll go and work with those offline somewhere.
And it strikes me that it's a natural extension that if you're improvising within the framework, there's also, you're allowing for the production of happy accidents that layer in more detail and more story.
Absolutely. Accidents, happy accidents are where some of the best things come from. You have to go out equipped with a sensitivity to hear things so that you may go out to record a rocket launch thinking, oh, I'm doing rockets today or something. But then you go back to the motel that night in Las Cruces and you find a squeaky air conditioner that's fantastic, better than the rocket you recorded, and you go back with that, and that becomes a Star Destroyer, slowed down or something. I mean, so you have to just be on the alert for what's useful.
I'm curious if in the early days there was a moment you used a really weird sound for something and then got to watch an audience experience it, like watch it work to an audience.
That happens every day.
Okay,
a weird sound. Well, I mean, the thrill of sound editing is once again, if it's a science fiction, fantasy type movie, which doesn't have a lot of useful sound in the production, except dialogue, the fun is putting a sound in for the first time. It brings it to life.
Yeah.
You know, you first got a Star Wars movie, and they're all running around on wooden floors in the.
You can hear that
in the blockade runner.
Yeah.
We can't use that. And you're hearing directors yelling instructions, or a pyro that sounds like fireworks. Once you start putting in, throw all that away, and once you start putting in the first hum of the ship or something, ooh, now suddenly it's brought to life and it has life in a different form.
And that hum might be a squeaky radiator in Las Cruces.
It could be. It could be as simple as that. It's something you didn't plan to do. And so many things are like that. You discover it by trial and error. It's hard to reason them out.
Yeah.
I would try ahead of time, be the scientist. I'll reason this out, write a paper about it first. It's good to do that. It gets you set in a direction. But you've got to be on the alert for sounds that you can use. I mean, I usually carry a recorder. I have it with me today. You go into a convenience store. You go to get a soda out of the refrigerator, and the fans are broken in there, and they're going, wow, wow, wow. Go back and record it.
My mini fridge at the cave has this that does about every 5 minutes. It's wonderful.
That's worth something.
Does this also describe George too? Is he an improviser when he's working out the process, or is he attuned to the happy accidents?
Well, it's hard to speak for George.
Sure, of course.
I mean,
he
has a tremendous imagination and a good sense of humor. Those two things that are, useful tools. And he, of course, the serious side. But an advantage of working for George Lucas in sound was that he liked experimentation, and he could suggest things to try. He made a situation in sound. I'm sorry, George created a situation for me in sound such that I could experiment with no fear that I'd be fired, in a sense.
Right.
Some powerful people you work for will come in and say, hey, do something now, go, I want to hear it tomorrow or something, and it's leave and then come back. And that's hard to work that way because you don't know the answer often. You want to try different things. George would allow us experimentation, and he loved the accidents. If we were fooling around on the keyboard, that's Sebulba's, the whoop, 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 whoop of his kind. Well, George and I had a bunch of different motors on the keyboard, and we were just playing around, and I was looking for something, and I started to tap that one key. It was actually an acceleration from a cigarette boat, one of those things. And then George heard that. Hey, and he goes over there. That's great, and he starts doing that. And so that comes up. That made. I didn't get there. I almost got there. I was just testing to see if that sound was on that key. And so he heard something in that, and that became an iconic sound.
I got to say, there's a way in which the process sounds so thrilling. It just sounds endlessly kind of, you're solving problems, you're solving them in unexpected ways. I love how improvisatory it is. It just sounds really magical.
There's a lot of stress.
Sure.
It's movie making.
Yeah.
There's deadlines. There's times when people are not happy. You try to please your clients. Lucasfilm generally for us in sound was a pleasant experience. There was always hurdles or bumps where we just couldn't come up with something that satisfied George, and we had to work harder to come up with something. And there's the stress of it all, the deadlines and all of that. So it was.
That's the crucible.
Yeah, there is a crucible. I mean, I had one nervous breakdown along the way. And,
fun.
Yeah, I mean, and just where I just couldn't work anymore. I found myself crying at work. It was just the pressure, and then say budget restrictions. You can't do this. You can't do that. And I got discouraged, and you needed to step away for a while and reset your expectations. I had that, in particular, since I won an Oscar on the first major film I worked on. that puts in the excitement, of course, being honored, but the expectation then that I put on myself. I've got to do this every time. I've got to be labeled a genius by Time magazine again, or something. That was a destructive thing for a decade or so because I just it made it less fun to come to work,
Right.
thinking that I wasn't just doing this in innocence and to please myself and get entertainment out of it, that I was supposed to meet some other standard. You can't quite live that way. No. It tears you apart. You know, I don't think I ever totally escaped that, but I was able to reduce it to a livable point, you know.
Ben, I can't thank you enough for sharing these stories with me. Thank you so much.
Well, you're welcome. Really. It's great to be here in this historic space.
It's such an amazing space.
Yeah.